And the last one, I'm going to go to SDG3, but I'm not going to ask about it in general. Now we're going to dive into a specific case. I would like to know whether or not I will have a vaccine in my lifetime that I can go to, I go get vaccinated at Safeway, right? Not even the doctor's office. So I want to know, when will I be able to go to Safeway and get a vaccine that will eliminate, we'll just say 85% of the common cold, because there's actually like 200 diseases that we all call the common cold. So I want the most common colds gone. I would like to never catch them again, right? It's been the bad part of the bad pandemic was the lockdown. The good part was I only caught one cold in the last year, and it was really mild. So I'm really happy about that. Let's just do the letters again. Where are we in terms of curing the common cold? A, B, C, D, E, or A, B, C, D, or E. Okay, and the answers are A, B, something like that. And it turns out, my wife just told me this is why I put it in the lecture, that some lab has a solution. They have a common cold vaccine. It exists in a healthcare company somewhere in the United States. And the problem has been that they couldn't get enough money to run through all the testing. So given that news, I want you back in the chat window, tell me how many years, specifically, how many years until I can go to Safeway and buy a vaccine for the common cold. I presume insurance is not going to cover this. Let's ignore that for a minute. Got to pay out of pocket. So how many years until I or one of you guys can go to Safeway and get a vaccine? Or something equivalent if you don't believe Safeway will exist by then. So I got 3, 26, 7, will not happen, 10. So this is where it gets hard to predict the future. It seems like we'll be able to solve this problem someday. It seems like it's a solvable problem. If you don't believe that vaccine exists, we just saw a vaccine created out of nowhere in 10 months, right, for a new disease. So we'll probably be able to solve this one. That seems reasonable. And the hard part is to know when. And again, I'm trying to relate this back to being an investor. You have to know when. So it's not good enough for them to say, I have a solution. If a company pitched you today and said, I have a solution to the common cold, whether it's a pill that gets rid of the symptoms, or a pill that stops the virus from replicating, or a vaccine that just stops the virus completely, that's nice. They might be able to convince you that they have the technology, but they also have to convince you that they can have the technology in the market next year, because you can only give them enough money for a year. Right? You're only going to get funded for a year. It's one of the rules of funding. So what they would do if they were pitching this to you now, and I wish they were, this is not real, is they would bring you a business plan. And if you haven't seen this before, we'll do a little tiny bit of angel investing 101 here. A vaccine business plan would include this kind of information, not specifically like this, but more or less this information. So are there enough customers? What would be the price? How much is the opportunity in total? I'll do this one at a time in a second. How long until it's ready for production? How much are they asking for in terms of funding? And is all this reasonable? So if we just dive into that, we get to, are there enough customers? So back to the chat window. If you could have for free a vaccine that gave you immunity to almost every disease that causes the common cold, would you take that vaccine right now? And it's been proven safe and all that. And I got some yeses. I got one person who doesn't like vaccines. I got a sure. I got another no. Okay, so the person who typed in no, can you elaborate? Oh, I got two no's. If you said no, can you elaborate in the chat window and tell me why you would not want a vaccine for the cold? I'm surprised at this. I would just think everybody would want to get rid of colds. And I understand not everybody believes in vaccines, but I personally do. So when we get the specifics on, okay, well, how long does that immunity last? Do you have to get a vaccine every year? Is there going to be mutations? And one person says it's just not, colds just aren't enough of a problem to solve it. That's a great answer. I've seen that over and over again in the world of startups, that people solve problems that are nice, but not important enough that I would pay for it, pay for a solution. That's a common issue. We call that aspirins and vitamins. People, the anecdote goes, if you go and stand in a drugstore, which you shouldn't do right now, next year, if you stand in a drugstore for a few hours and you just watch what people buy, you will see a lot more people buy aspirin or equivalent than buy vitamins, because people like to solve pain more than they like to just generally be healthier. And I'm not going to ask you in the chat window here, but clearly there's a price that we would pay. All the people who said yes Well, at $10, I asked you free. At $10, you'd probably still say yes. At $100, some of you might drop off. At $1,000 more will drop off. If it was $10,000 to get rid of the common cold, probably most people wouldn't get the vaccine. And then the opportunity size, you take the number of customers who said yes, you multiply by the price, and that tells you what the opportunity is. So let's just say that half the world would say yes to this cold vaccine. So we get to 3.5 billion people. We'll round up to 4. There'll be 8 billion people soon enough. So 4 billion people said yes, and it was $10 a shot. That's $40 billion. And if it was $100 a shot, that would be $400 billion. Or if it's, let's just go the other way. If it's $10 a shot, but you have to have a shot every year because there's different variations of colds like flu vaccines. Well, we're talking about $40 billion a year, like $400 billion in 10 years. That's a big opportunity. That's what we'd call a big opportunity. And then the next question is, how long would it take to get to production? And here we have some historic values to look at. So again, if somebody pitched you the cold vaccine, you liked it, it was a $10 shot or less, you got through all that, the next question you should ask is, okay, when are you going to be ready? They're going to tell you they're going to be ready next year. And then you're going to push back because you've done some research and you're going to say, okay, well, how are you going to be ready next year when all the other vaccines took like 10, 15, 20 years to get to market? And how are you going to do it on whatever you're asking me for when those vaccines cost $10 billion or more? And how are you going to actually be sure that your vaccine works when most vaccines actually fail when they run in clinical trials? We have been incredibly lucky with the coronavirus vaccine that we have 7 tested vaccines that came out and worked. What the news is not telling us, there was one day when they said Merck pulled their vaccine research because they had two vaccines in the lab and they tested them out in phase 1 trials and they didn't work. There's like 120 other vaccines in the lab right now. Most of those are not going to get to market. Most vaccines don't work. And so then the next question would be, how much are they raising? And if they said, we're raising $1 million, that's all we need. Again, you should push back and say, well, how could you possibly do this on $1 million or 10? If they said, okay, we need $100 million, then that question you would ask as an angel is, okay, but what do you need my money for? All the angels in the world into one company is nowhere near $100 million. So why are you talking to angels if you need that much money? And it gets worse if it gets bigger. I said, historically, these things cost billions and billions. So this should not be a pitch to an angel group. And then in thinking about this came up as a dinner conversation with my wife a few days ago. This is the talk from last week. This is Bill Gross's talk about what makes startups succeed. And what he determined from researching 200 startups is that by far the number one important factor is timing. So here's how it would go today if I were pitched a cold vaccine. So what if? There's a bunch of what ifs here. What if it turned out that the coronavirus vaccine was basically the same as the common cold vaccine, right? 10 or 20% of common colds are coronaviruses. So we should be able to take the technology from the COVID-19 vaccine, tweak it, and we should be able to solve 20% of all the colds. And like 50, 60% are rhinoviruses, and maybe they're pretty close, and we could tweak the technology and cover those too. Now, we also have to assume that these coronavirus vaccines are being deployed into the world, right? There's been about 100 million doses put in arms, or almost 100 billion doses by now. We expect that there will literally be billions of doses put in arms by middle of the year, not even the end of this year. So this infrastructure is already happening. And we have one more assumption here, which is we've seen some variations of coronaviruses, and it may be that these variants keep popping up. And so it may be that we have to keep modifying the vaccine that we have right now to handle the variants. And today's news is Moderna is starting to test a variant of the vaccine that they have. Right? It works really well, but it doesn't work as well in South Africa. And so they're working on a variation for that. And then the big what if. Okay, so if they're able to use the technology that they're using, let's just say it's Moderna and Pfizer, which are just mRNA vaccines. What if they could tweak it and add in the common cold piece to that vaccine? So same vaccine, you'd get one shot. It would cover you for coronavirus. And then for $10 extra, you can have the version that cures the common cold or cures 80% of the common colds. Then how would that change the timeline? And how would that change the amount of money needed to deploy this? So all of a sudden, we have an opportunity that we didn't have in 2019 or 2018 or any year before that, which is we have a channel to get common cold viruses or common cold vaccines into people's arms. And it only exists for 2021 and maybe 2022 and 23. We don't know how long we're going to need the coronavirus vaccine, but that opportunity exists right now. And if I were running Moderna or Pfizer, I would definitely be putting money toward this, because at some point in 2021, they lose their customers. At some point, everybody who wants a coronavirus vaccine has gotten one, and yet they have all the infrastructure to make billions of vaccines, and they want to sell billions of vaccines, and they need another disease to solve. So all of a sudden, there becomes a path to get that exponential curve to get to phase C of our sigmoid curve for the common cold vaccine. I bring this up not because it's exciting in news and in my dinner conversation, because that's how entrepreneurs think. When we talk about seeing the future, entrepreneurs will see out a few months or a few years into the future and say, oh, if I just take this piece that just started to become possible now, and I apply it to this other problem, I can solve this other problem. And maybe I couldn't do it 5 years ago, or maybe nobody put these pieces together 5 years ago. But if I put them together now, then in a year or two, I can have a solution out there and I can be on one of those rocket ships. Right? That's the way that entrepreneurs think about it. And so let's do a couple examples of that.